Hola y buenos días. En esta lección vamos a hablar sobre los verbos de cambio de raíz. Verbs de cambio de raíz. Verbs that are stem changing. So what is a stem changing verb? A stem changing verb is simply a verb who has a spelling change in its stem. Its stem being the part of the word or the verb that comes prior to the AR, ER, or IR ending when it's in the infinitive form, okay? So when you've taken off that AR, ER, and IR like we were learning to conjugate verbs, then you will be left with its stem, and certain verbs have changes, okay? This is, of course, not an all-inclusive list, but it is some of the most common stem-changing verbs that you're going to find and those that are used in this lesson. So hopefully you watched the lesson video and that was helpful, but if you need a little extra assistance, then utilizing this video is a great way to hopefully get this cleared up. So let's look at some examples. Okay. So we have verbs that are typically E to IE or O to UE. Now, as I said, this is not an all-inclusive list. We also have some verbs that are E to I in the present tense, and then we have verbs that are U to UE, so there's always going to be some exceptions, but these are some of our most common verbs that we're going to see, and we're just going to talk about how they are conjugated and how they change. It's really something that you have to memorize. There isn't a real pattern as far as to which verbs would be stem changing, so you really just have to memorize the verbs that are going to be stem changing. And the biggest key here as we're going through in this particular class and at this level is just being able to recognize. So obviously sometimes we're going to forget when we're producing and we're writing, but if we can make sure that as we're reading, as we're listening, we're able to recognize what verbs that we are hearing or we are seeing, and if they have a stem change, but we can still recognize them, it can help us to learn the language and can understand what's being said. So here, like I said, are some of our most common ones and the ones that are in this lesson. Just want to bring a quick note to the links here, okay? This is your verb conjugator, studyspanish.com verb conjugator. That's a great place to go if you're not sure how to conjugate a particular verb, especially if it's one that we haven't learned or we haven't studied. So check that out. It's a neat little link. And then I've got a verb conjugation chart here as well. I'll just click on that. This is something that you can print out for yourself. It just goes over the different endings, and then you can use it to fill in verbs. This is great for using not just regular verbs, but for irregular verbs, for adding in any of these stem changing verbs that have that spelling change. And then as we get into other tenses, you can always use it for those as well. But it's just a chart that shows you how each form of the verb would be changed. Of course, this references your endings for regular AR, ER, and IR verbs in the present tense, but this can also be used in conjunction with any present tense stem changing verbs. So it might be something you want to print out, or you can even just save yourself a copy and fill it in by typing it in, and it's something great to reference when you're doing your writing or when you're doing some of your activities, because as always, you may utilize your notes when you're doing any of the practice activities or any of the assessments here in this course, so you always want to have those handy and use those as a good reference. So let's talk about stem changing. The typical rule is that the stem will change, and like I said, the stem is the part that is left after you remove the ending, the ER, IR, or AR. So once we've removed that ending, we're left with the stem. En este caso, querer, we take off the ER and we're left with quer, Q-U-E-R. So the stem change occurs in either the last E or the last O, there's more than one, or of course the E to I if you're using E to I verbs. So if there is more than one, like as in the case of querer, obviously the ER ending is removed, so now we're left with just one E, so that's a stem changer. But in verbs like preferir or entender, you're going to remove the IR and you're going to be left with prefer, and it's going to be the second E that's going to change. The same with entender, right? So it's prefiero, prefieres, prefiere, and then entender, entiendo, entiendes. And you can see a lot of these conjugated in your book, or you can go again to the Spanish verb conjugator and look at those for extra practice. So notice that the rules are, it's going to change in all forms except nosotros and vosotros. As you know, I am not utilizing vosotros a lot in this course because, as a reminder, this is just an informal form of you, meaning you all, that's only utilized throughout Spain. So make sure that you're familiar with it and you can recognize it, but I don't anticipate any situations where you need to utilize it regularly in this course other than just being familiar and recognizing to whom it is speaking when you see that verb used. Okay, so notice here the use of these in all forms except the nosotros. When you see a chart in this way, when you see the chart set up in this way, you will notice that it has the forms of the singular forms, yo, tú, él, ellos, usted, and then it has on the left side, and then the plural forms, nosotros, vosotros, and ellos, ellos, and ustedes on the right-hand side in the column. This is done on purpose so that you can divide them into singular and plural forms, but it also gives you an opportunity to look at, if we look at it in this way, we can sometimes refer to these as boot verbs. Okay, you may have heard this before. Some people refer to these as boot verbs because when you look at the verbs that have the stem change, if you were to circle here, it is the shape of a boot. So, pardon, it keeps skipping past me. So, if you notice there, that forms a boot when you are circling the ones that are stem changing. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's something that you might hear in other lessons, or you may see when you're looking up these verbs out there, is that they're called boot verbs. And that just means they're stem changing, and then when they're put in a chart like this, those that are stem changing make the form of a boot because the nosotros and vosotros forms do not stem change. Okay, so just keep in mind, no stem change in the nosotros and vosotros. Okay, continuamos. So let's practice some of these real quickly. I want you to take the verb that is in parentheses, reference back if you need to in your slideshow or in your textbook, and decide how you would conjugate this verb based on the subject. Okay, it might be at the beginning, it might be afterwards if it's in a question, and then you're going to just pause the video, complete these, and then when you unpause, we will go over the answers. Okay, muy bien. So hopefully you've taken a moment to answer these. I have highlighted here in red, in rojo, right? La parte que cambia, right? The part where we changed it. And then I've shown you how we would conjugate it to match the subject. So let's look at these. ¿Qué sirven ustedes aquí? ¿Qué sirven? What do you all serve? I'm talking to you all, ustedes. So I need the ending en, sirven. And servir is a stem changing. It becomes ida I. So ¿qué sirven ustedes? Okay. If they were to answer, they might answer me, nosotros servimos, right? Comida americana, right? Servimos. Remember, no stem change in the nosotros form. The next question, ¿qué piensas tú? I'm asking you. Tú is the subject, so I use as as my ending, piensas, and then the I has to change to IE. ¿Qué piensas? ¿Qué piensas de eso? What do you think of this, right? Oh, yo pienso que es muy bueno, right? I think it's very good. Yo pienso. Dormir is a O to UE, so when we make the statement, yo nunca duermo más de 7 horas, I'm saying I never. Don't let that word confuse you. It's just a, clarifier. So I never sleep, because we're still yo duermo, I sleep, right? I never sleep more than 7 hours. Duermo, right? ¿Cuántas horas duermes tú? Right? If I were asking you how many hours you sleep, ¿cuántas horas duermes? It would still change, right? Duermo. Nosotros nunca dormimos menos de 8 horas. Okay? Perdón. Perdón. We never sleep. So now we're using the nosotros form. Nosotros dormimos. No hay un cambio, right? It doesn't stem change. Nosotros dormimos menos de 8 horas. 8 horas. All right, now I'm talking to Samuel. Samuel, ¿entiendes lo que dice ella? I'm asking Samuel, do you understand what she's saying? Okay, entiendes. Entender, we use the ending es with to because I'm talking to Samuel, and I know this because there's a comma and then my question, so I know I've addressed Samuel as my subject, so I would use tu because it's his first name, so we're familiar. ¿Entiendes lo que dice ella? ¿Entiendes? Ida, I-E. Entiende. And he might say, no entiendo nada, right? I don't understand anything. Next one, qué lástima. No puedo ir al baile porque tengo que trabajar. So, qué lástima. Ah, what a shame, what a pity. Yo no puedo. I can't, or I am not able to go to the dance because I have to work. So, no puedo. Poder becomes puedo, right? Puedo. I might ask you, ¿y tú puedes ir al baile? Are you able to go? ¿Tú puedes ir al baile? Okay. So, again, stem changing in all the forms except nosotros. So, nosotros no podemos viajar mucho porque tenemos niños pequeños. Nosotros no podemos. We are not able to travel a lot because we have small children. So, no podemos. Podemos is la forma de nosotros. Okay? All right. Muy bien. So there's one more practice. We have a little bit of time to do, so if you want to take a moment to do these, I will go over these as well, practicing some of these other forms. So go ahead and pause the video, take a moment to answer the questions, or fill in the blanks, and then we'll go over them. Okay, excelente. Esto no sirve. Está roto. Esto is your subject here. Esto, this. So it's one thing, it's a singular thing, so we know we're going to use the third person singular. It's like saying él or ella, right, or it. Esto no sirve. In this case, sirve is meaning it doesn't work, okay? We can say that something sirve or no sirve if we're saying it works or doesn't work when we're describing like some object, okay? It can mean serve, as in serving your food. Of course, it can mean serve a purpose, right? So if it's not serving its purpose, it's not working, right? So in this particular sentence, esto no sirve is saying this doesn't work, okay? Está roto. It is broken. ¿A qué hora vuelves tú por la noche? Volver is a stem changing. Volver means to return. So I'm asking you, at what time do you return in the evening, right, at night? Vuelves tú, right? Vuelves. Hay helado y pastel. ¿Cuál prefieres tú? Okay, there's ice cream and cake. Which do you prefer? ¿Cuál prefieres tú? Prefieres, right? Ida, I-E, and I'm asking you tú, so ends in ES. Ellos nunca piden café en el desayuno. Ellos nunca piden. They never piden. They never order or ask for. Piden. We use the en ending because it's plural, ellos, and e becomes I because pedir is un verbo de e-a-i, right? Ida, I. Ellos nunca piden café en el desayuno. They never order coffee at breakfast. ¿A qué hora almuerzan ustedes? ¿A qué hora almuerzan? Almorzar is a stem change. We're using the ustedes form, on, right? Plural. And then almuer. You might remember that for the word lunch is el almuerzo. So that should help you remember that the verb almorzar changes in all its forms, of course, except nosotros. But almorzamos el almuerzo, right? We have lunch, the lunch, right? We lunch the lunch. Almuerzan is basically saying to eat lunch, to have lunch. Remember, in Espanol, when we're saying to have particular meals, we can actually use the name of that meal as a verb. So desayuno is breakfast, el almuerzo is lunch, la cena is dinner, but we can also use them as verbs. Desayunar, yo desayuno a las 8, I have breakfast at 8 o'clock. Or I can say yo como el desayuno. Almorzar, to have lunch. I can say yo como el almuerzo, or I can say yo almuerzo a las 12, right? I have lunch or I eat lunch. And then cena, la cena is dinner, right? So I could say yo como la cena or simply yo ceno, okay? Let's finish off these last two. Nosotros podemos, poder en la forma de nosotros. It's not stem changing. Podemos almorzar en mi casa. We are able to lunch at home. And yo no quiero cocinar esta